Well, good afternoon. We would, Cheryl Lombard and myself, Warren Tenney, would like to welcome you to this November 9th meeting of the Post-2025 AMAs Committee. We appreciate all of you joining us. We know it's been just 2 weeks since our last meeting, so we appreciate everyone being flexible with their schedules and taking the time out to discuss how we can continue to work on AMA management after post-2025. So again, want to express participation for all of you for tuning into these meetings and actively being engaged. We appreciate all the participation that we have had over the last few months, as well as over the last couple of years since this committee has started. But in the last few months, we've been really trying to focus on looking at solutions, and would like to also just give a big shout out to ADWR staff for all the support that they give to Cheryl and I with this committee. We certainly could not do this without their support. So why don't we go ahead and start a little bit where we left off. So if we could go to the next slide. So as a quick reminder of where we've been, at our last meeting, we had a productive discussion about a slate of proposals that Cheryl and I thought the committee could forward to the Governor's Water Council. Following that discussion, we have further refined the package of proposals so that there are now only 5. If you remember, there were 7 last time, so now it's down to 5. And we emailed to you yesterday the updated list along with the agenda for today's meeting. We would like to review those 5 proposals with you today to determine if there's generally agreed upon support to present these proposals to the Governor's Water Council at their November 30th meeting. As a reminder, since this summer, this committee has suggested various ideas for addressing the issues of unreplenished groundwater withdrawals, groundwater in the Assured Water Supply Program, and hydrologic disconnect. Cheryl and I have kept track of those ideas and reviewed them to see which ones could be presented by the end of the year to the Governor's Water Council, considering the possibility that some of the proposals may require legislation. The criteria we have used for selecting the 2021 slate are that the proposal addresses one or more of the issues, the committee is in general support, and it is politically viable at this moment. Cheryl and I feel that the 5 proposals are the ones to present at this time to the council, not because they are necessarily the best ones to make the largest difference in addressing the challenges facing the AMAs. Rather, we are discussing today these 5 proposals because they meet our 3 criterions, particularly political viability. I know that many of you feel that this committee should be advancing bigger proposals that would more significantly address unreplenished groundwater pumping or groundwater in the Assured Water Supply Program. This is understandable, considering that nearly 400,000 acre-feet of unreplenished groundwater pumping is occurring annually in just the Phoenix AMA alone, making it nearly impossible for the Phoenix AMA to reach safe yield. Yet these 5 proposals should be looked at as a first step for addressing post-2025 issues. And we can continue to work on the other ideas that all of you have helped to identify as possible solutions as we move into the new year. Plus, we should all recognize that we are part of and contribute to our political reality. So the more we acknowledge the issues in the AMAs, discuss them, and advocate for improvements, the more political viability moves towards political necessity to address these issues. This should especially be the case when it is recognized that our economic viability depends upon how well we continue to safeguard our groundwater. So again, today, we'd like to determine overall support from the committee to forward these 5 proposals to the Governor's Water Council and to recognize that the other issues that we have identified, we can continue to discuss as we move into the new year. As a reminder, as we move through this meeting, if you have questions or comments, please just let us know in the chat room and we will certainly call upon you. So let's move to the next slide, please. So this is the 2021 package of post-2025 AMA's post-2025 AMA's proposals. They are to improve the regulatory process for recharge and recovery, express support for further discussions refining Arizona's approach to augmentation, remove waterbud restrictions, accelerate ADEQ's development of administrative rules for direct potable reuse, and review ADWR's methodology for reviewing certificate and analysis of assured water supply applications in commingled distribution systems. So let's talk a little bit more in detail on these. And so the next slide, please. So the first one is pretty consistent to what we had discussed last month, or 2 weeks ago. Yes, that was last month. So that would be that we are asking ADWR to initiate a comprehensive review of its recharge and recovery program with input from stakeholders. The expectation is this would lead to improvements to the recharge and recovery program. We did acknowledge in the updated document that this should include a review of the interface between the recharge program and the assured water supply program to identify any potential improvements. This had been a suggestion made at our last meeting. So I'm going to just pause here for a moment to see if anyone has any particular comments regarding this specific proposal.
Warren, it's Spencer.
Hi, Spencer.
Please Hi, how you doing? There was a lot of discussion on this issue last time regarding the Assured Water Supply Program, and you just mentioned about the interface. Can you just walk me through that? It's not clear to me what you mean by that. And it's also not reflected in the document anywhere.
So I believe on
we added the last bullet.
Yeah, in the last bullet, that was where we had identified issues, that it was noted that there would be that one of the things that we wanted to be sure to look at would be to see how the recharge and recovery program interfaces with the assured water supply program. And so I guess what we mean by that, or at least what we understood and took away from the discussion, is that it's recognized that the recharge and recovery program doesn't just happen all by itself, that it plays an important part in the assured water supply program. And so that's the interface that we were referring to.
Was there concern or reluctance to include the Assured Water Supply Program as a part of the stakeholder process?
We were looking at this as a specific recommendation in regards to the recharge and recovery program, we were wanting to capture that does interface with the Assured Water Supply Program. One of the key issues that this committee identified and took to the Governor's Water Council earlier this year was the looking at groundwater in the Assured Water Supply Program and some of the issues that are then clearly tied with groundwater in the Assured Water Supply Program. Some of the suggestions that have been made as we have discussed this since the summer, we've put those ideas down and anticipate that we'll continue to have further discussion on how those ideas could help to address groundwater in the Assured Water Supply Program. So, any other questions or comments at this moment? So let me move on. And again, feel free, please.
Warren?
Yes.
I put something in the chat, and
Oh, I'm
and
sorry.
words matter to a word wonk like myself, and I'm not sure what we're discussing, whether we're discussing the existing language in the paper that you sent us or these slides, which are much abbreviated, and it matters in terms of what it is that you are actually advancing to proposing be advanced to the full council. So if you could clarify that, please.
Yes, and I'm sorry I didn't have my screen set right to see the chat room. So,
And I just replied to you, Kathy. It's a combination like we did last time. Because I mean, wordsmithing in a PowerPoint is not exactly the best way. So it's best if you look at the document and have read the document before the meeting, which I'm sure you have, to get the specifics and if you have any questions.
yeah, and let me just go ahead and add that what we were in the document, we were wanting to acknowledge that recharge and recovery issues have been raised and as things that stakeholders would like to have looked at. And it then made sense that perhaps that a good way of looking at these various issues rather than taking one at a time was to request that ADWR initiate a review of its recharge and recovery program and get with input from stakeholders. And therefore, that is the proposal that we would be making to the Governor's Water Council, is we would like the Governor's Water Council to request or make the recommendation that DWR initiate a comprehensive review of the recharge and recovery program and with input from stakeholders. So,
And if you remember at our last meeting, even before anything was added, you know, DWR has not committed to the stakeholder process. So I think, you know, it will be an important discussion both here, but more importantly, as we move to the Governor's Augmentation Council.
and also just to acknowledge and give recognition that ADWR has been trying to look at some of the recharge and recovery program and have made some recent proposals, which again, I think has caused us to think and to want to recommend that they continue those type of discussions and getting more input from stakeholders as they move forward and looking at aspects of the recharge and recovery program. So in regards to the, so I'll just go ahead and jump to the next one. We we greatly simplified this proposal. We recognize and acknowledge that we bit off way too much more than we could handle last time, despite our intentions of trying to address more than one thing in that. And so we've really simplified this to just be to express support for further discussions refining Arizona's approach to augmentation. And another way of saying that is we're just saying, hey, the Long-Term Water Augmentation Committee needs to continue to look at and refine Arizona's strategic approach to augmentation. I guess it's another way of this committee acknowledging to the Governor's Water Council that the Governor's Water Augmentation, Innovation, and Conservation Council needs to be continuing to look at how Arizona is continue to look at Arizona's approach to augmentation. Cheryl, do you want to add anything on with that?
No, I mean, it's capturing what Wade, I think, said at the last meeting. I also do think it ties with, I can't remember if it was our last Governor's Council, where the speaker spoke about the drought mitigation fund that was created in last year's legislature. So I think it's really kind of wrapping all that together over in the augmentation committee.
So I'm not seeing any, Carol has a comment.
Thank you, Warren. I just wanted to clarify, the Long-Term Water Augmentation Committee hasn't begun any planning for statewide augmentations, any sort of planning process for that at this point. Wade did bring that point up at the council meeting recently. That just wanted to clarify that that's not an effort that's been undertaken to date. There was the long-term water augmentation options report that was provided, I think that was back in 2019. But in terms of a comprehensive planning process, that hasn't been undertaken.
And then Kathy made a comment that said, I'm not sure it's possible to have an Arizona approach to augmentation. It would seem more appropriate to look at various strategic approaches to augmentation. Kathy, did you want to add anything more, or was that if not, then Sarah Porter has a comment.
Hi, thank you, Warren and Cheryl. I'm not sure what the wording is going to be, but I'm a little bit uncomfortable with the wording, at least on the bullet point on the PowerPoint, because it presupposes a statewide strategic approach to augmentation, which would be a conversation for the state to have. But we don't have it. We've never had it, so I want to make sure that we're clear that we're not recommending the development of a statewide strategic approach, or just to have some clarity there.
I think this is where I would refer to the actual document for the proposal. It says we are recommending to the council that continued discussions be held in the long-term water augmentation committee refining Arizona's strategic approach to augmentation.
And so I'll just say that I have a little discomfort there, because we don't, I've been part of that committee, and the discussions it's been a fantastic process, but the charge of that committee was to identify for each planning area opportunities for augmentation. And we produced a report, I think in 2019, and then some supplemental, worked on some supplemental information that really, drills down into opportunities for augmentation for each of those planning areas. But it wasn't the charge of that committee to go beyond that. For example, to think of if we start talking about statewide approaches, we're talking about perhaps prioritizing certain users, where, we actually kind of walked away from talking about funding, strategies for funding augmentation in that committee. And I'm just concerned that it may sound like this committee is recommending that the long-term water augmentation committee come up with something that we really haven't discussed. I mean, we haven't discussed it here, and we haven't discussed it in that committee, a statewide strategy for augmentation. That's beyond what the work we've done.
I think timing wise, and I'm just going off the last council meeting where I believe Wade brought up this concept. And then he reiterated at our last post 2025 committee. It may be, I agree with you, maybe we're getting ahead of it, but I also think to the point of whether it's proper in this committee. At least Warren and I, we heard you all last time. It's maybe not ready for prime time. It is a better discussion within a newly revamped augmentation committee, which I believe Wade was laying out at our last council meeting. So I think we'll turn to Wade and maybe how they agendize this at the next council meeting, maybe. I mean, how do you think?
And can I just add, I'm just concerned that keeping the augmentation discussion in the long-term water augmentation committee makes a lot of sense to me, given how much time that committee has spent on these questions. But that's different from saying we are advocating a statewide augmentation strategy. That's a very different animal. And so no matter how well my friend Wade articulated in the last meeting, I'm not sure exactly what we're sending over, other than please keep the augmentation discussion in that committee.
So I don't know if this would help, but is the part that's creating some heartburn is, I don't know if it's the use of the word refining, or I'm assuming it's particularly the use of the word strategic. It seems that there should be support for further discussions about Arizona's approach to augmentation.
It's statewide approach. Those words. The idea that it's the job of the state, of the Department of Water Resources or the state to figure out who gets water, how to get it, that would be different. That would be new for Arizona. That's not the way it's been done in the past. And so those are the two words that are causing me a little bit of heartburn.
So, and I'm not trying to be difficult, but I'm not seeing statewide. I'm just seeing the name Arizona, which
well, it's in the paper that was sent over. It's under that express support. It's in the third paragraph.
Oh,
it says co-chairs have revised this proposal to a recommendation that refinement of a statewide approach to augmentation continue to occur. I think Cynthia Campbell has suggested changing the language, and there might be a better way to phrase it so that we're making clear what we're asking for here.
Yes, and just I'll go ahead and read out loud Cynthia's comment. Why don't we just say it this way? The appropriate place for augmentation discussions is with the Long-Term Water Augmentation Committee. Sharon Megdal added that totally understands Sarah's commentary, and Carol added yes to clarify. Yes, Wade raised the idea of long-term water augmentation, creating a statewide plan for water augmentation, but that has not been discussed by the committee, at least not in recent years. Dave Roberts also said, I agree with Cynthia, and I think that is what Wade was intending. And Sharon just said, why is the bullet necessary if we go with Cynthia's proposal? So I just want to say I recognize that I appreciate this discussion because I can see why in that third paragraph of the updated, using the word statewide, then cast a different take on how this was being looked at. Whereas I was just getting focused on, well, we're just talking about Arizona's approach to augmentation, not necessarily whether it becomes statewide or whatever. So we certainly can clean this up or do a little more refining of the word here.
Thank you.
Cheryl, anything there? Okay. Well, let's go to the next slide then. And thank you. And again, if anyone has any thoughts or wants to revisit any of these items, please just let us know in the chat room. So these next two items were are basically the same as what we had discussed 2 weeks ago. It includes to remove waterbud restrictions or the restriction on waterbud, and then also accelerate ADEQ's development of administrative rules for direct potable reuse. I'll open it up for any discussion on either of these. Again, particularly the one on direct potable reuse was, I thought we heard unanimous, I think as close to unanimous support as the committee is possible to get in this committee. So any comments on either of these? Be glad to discuss. And just note in the chat room that Kathy Ferris has suggested getting rid of Arizona's approach on the previous discussion regarding augmentation. Doug Dunham voiced support for both proposals. Cynthia Campbell asked, I'm not sure about the last statement in the document. Cynthia,
You want me to explain? You want me to explain what I mean by that?
Yes, please.
So the last statement in the document said about development of administrative rules for direct potable reuse, which we support, and all the bullets you have here in your PowerPoint are great. But the last statement to me in the document is a little quizzical in the sense this would assist with unreplenished groundwater issue and groundwater in the AWS program issue. I'm not sure I see that. I mean, you know.
Yeah,
I'm not sure I understand that connection.
We were wanting to identify how that proposals would address or be tied with the issues that we had identified. And so I think when we were initially putting this together, we thought that it would be helpful with potentially reducing it could have a possible effect on unreplenished groundwater withdrawals, as well as assist in with the Assured Water Supply Program. We'll have to, I'll confess that we did not completely analyze and draw all the connection of how it would specifically do that. But we thought that there would be, that we were trying to, I guess, point out that being able to move forward with direct potable reuse, having that tool available with all the other ways that we utilize our effluent would be certainly an improvement, would help as we are trying to meet our management goal. So. Any other thoughts or comments? Joe Singleton noted support for both. Well, I'm going to go ahead and move to the next one. Again, if anyone at any time wants to revisit these, just let us know in the chat room, and we'll get back to these two or the previous two. So let's go to our fifth one, and this one I think generated the most discussion at our last meeting. I think part of that is there's a lot of need for us to just have a little better collective understanding about what we're actually looking at here. And so the proposal here, we've restated it where it would be a review ADWR's methodology for reviewing certificate and analysis of assured water supply applications in commingled distribution system. This would be where ADWR would consider enabling a developer to provide water to a water provider that can then serve that water through the provider's mixed system without regard to historic volumetric accounting policy for assured water supply purposes. We much appreciate that Jennifer Heim, ADWR legal counsel, has stepped forward and is willing to provide us an overview about this issue that, again, will, I think, help us all to have the same information and understanding about commingled distribution systems and what that all means when looking at the assured water supply program, specifically in regards with certificates and analysis. So Jennifer, I'm going to turn it over to you. And thank you again for doing this.
Well, thank you to both the co-chairs and to the entire committee for allowing me to come to present on this topic. I know that there has been some discussions about this issue, and I think it would be hopefully helpful for people to understand sort of what is the issue, what is at the heart of perhaps the department's concerns regarding proposed changes to the way that the department reviews applications in this context. And then hopefully at the end of my presentation to present a sort of concept that hopefully, if it's not the solution, at least provides the sort of context and builds up sort of an understanding so that people can see where possible solutions might lie. I think that most people know when we're talking about commingled systems, we're referring to distribution systems that contain more than one legal type of water. And specifically in the context of this presentation, we're concerned about systems that contain at least some groundwater and how the department reviews applications for analyses and certificates when a subdivision, when an applicant proposes to serve a subdivision through a commingled system. So I'll go ahead and let's move to the next slide. This presentation is not very long, but I do think it is kind of important to just sort of talk briefly about sort of what are, the overarching objectives of the Assured Water Supply Program. I think it will help people to understand where there may be some sticking points with respect to proposed changes. Obviously, at least two very important objectives of the Assured Water Supply Program is to provide a consumer protection to home buyers and then also to sustain the state's economic health by preserving groundwater resources and promoting long-term water supply planning. Specifically, and I think my presentation you'll see emphasizes probably more the first concern or objective, the consumer protection aspect. And one of the important ways that the program does that is by requiring that in order to obtain plat approval and sell lots for homes, the developer demonstrate that the proposed subdivision's water supply will be physically, continuously, and legally available to serve the subdivision for 100 years. The state's guiding principle in assessing potential changes to the Assured Water Supply Program is to uphold that consumer protection and then also the water sustainability objectives of the program. We can go ahead and go to the next. So this presentation does not go through all the requirements for demonstrating an assured water supply, but for purposes of groundwater, and this becomes relevant when we're talking about commingled systems that contain groundwater, physical availability for groundwater requires, among other things, is showing that the groundwater will be withdrawn from depths that do not exceed certain depths to water levels within the AMA. And that projected depth to static water level has to take into account existing groundwater uses, as well as future uses associated with approved determinations. And we can go to the next slide. So how does the department review applications that involve commingled systems? An applicant for an analysis or a certificate relying on water delivered through a provider's commingled system has to demonstrate the physical availability of any groundwater delivered through that system. Even if, that's true, even if the applicant or the water provider proposes to bring in a new non-groundwater supply to the system in a volume that's equal to the applicant's demand. And why is that? So we can go to the next slide. The reasoning for that is because in the absence of a written agreement, to the contrary, the water provider would not be required to deliver the new non-groundwater supply only to the proposed subdivision if there were a shortage of the groundwater delivered through the system, so that homeowners in the new subdivision would still bear risks of groundwater shortage. And those are risks that are of the type that are designed to be avoided or at least mitigated by the Assured Water Supply Program. We can go to the next slide. So GWR is aware that stakeholders have requested more flexibility with respect to those requirements to demonstrate physical availability of groundwater supplies within a commingled system. And the stakeholders, they're looking for opportunities to bring new renewable supplies, long-term storage credits, or imported groundwater. So those are all supplies that I've sort of shorthanded as new supply into a provider system for delivery to a new development. And DWR is interested in facilitating those efforts, but it is important that that DWR still maintain those consumer protections in the Assured Water Supply Program. So let's go to the next. Oh, I'm going to go back. We'll go back to the first. Before we get to this next slide, there's a lot of text. It's small, and I know people are going to strain themselves to read it while I'm speaking. So, and there's some details in there. So before I get to this next concept, I think it's probably, people probably can see where this is maybe going. In the last slide, I talked about how in the absence of an agreement, we might call an exclusivity agreement, that a water provider would not be required to only deliver water to the new subdivision. It's logical to ask, well, could there be an exclusivity agreement whereby the water provider did agree to do that? And so this concept is represents sort of consideration of that idea. The department has identified some questions and perhaps some concerns that might come about because of that type of a proposal, but we wanted to present it as something that the department is willing to consider within the parameters of within certain parameters that I'll talk about in the next slide. So let's go ahead and move to the next slide. So the department would propose to allow an applicant for a certificate or an analysis to avoid the requirements to demonstrate the physical availability of groundwater in a commingled system if the applicant or the water provider brings in a new supply in sufficient quantity to serve the new development for 100 years, and the applicant enters into an exclusivity agreement whereby the water provider would agree to deliver the new supply only to the new development in times of groundwater shortage. That agreement would have to be legally enforceable, and the provider would need to be able to physically implement that agreement. And with respect to legal enforceability, on my next and final slide, which we'll get to in a minute, I will talk about one potential question or concern that the department's identified in that regard. And then this last bullet is that the addition of the new development would not reduce the volume of groundwater that must meet the consistency with management goal requirement for any other groundwater-based certificates within the same distribution system. And so, for instance, in the case where that consistency with goal is met through enrollment with GRD, it would require, this may actually not be a significant issue. It's something the department probably just needs to get more information about how these deliveries would be reported. But the concern would be that they would not be reported in such a way that this new supply would somehow reduce the replenishment obligation for sort of currently enrolled member lands. Let's go ahead to the last slide. So in connection with this question of whether or not an exclusivity agreement would be legally enforceable, the department did question and have some conversations around whether or not the Arizona Corporation Commission would and could approve that type of an exclusivity agreement. And the Corporation Commission has constitutional power to prescribe just and reasonable classifications to be used and just and reasonable rates and charges to be made and collected by public service corporations within the state. And I've cited here to a case in which the Court of Appeals described that the Corporation Commission does have had authority to require an HOA to provide non-discriminatory service within its service area. So before the department could issue a certificate or analysis on the basis of an exclusivity agreement, the department would likely need written assurance from the Corporation Commission, and that could be either in the form of a generally applicable rule that addresses these types of agreements and contains standards for what would need to be included in those agreements, or it might be an individual approval level, but some assurance that the Corporation Commission would uphold that type of an agreement. I will just note, if you go back to we don't have to actually go there, but if you look at my previous slide, this proposal would allow either an applicant or a water provider to bring in a new supply with an exclusivity agreement and avoid that requirement to demonstrate physical availability. So for purposes of the department's review, it would not matter whether it was the water provider or the applicant, the developer who brought in the new supply. That may make a difference to the Corporation Commission, and I can't speak to that, but that may, if a developer, not the water provider, brings in the water, that may possibly be looked more favorably upon in terms of justification for what I'll just call discrimination, in the sense of allowing for exclusive deliveries to one subdivision over another subdivision. So that's my final slide, and I I think that we recognize, we can go back to the previous slide if that's helpful for people to review that. And as I said, the department recognizes that there may be some challenges here, but we are hopeful that, and if I can answer questions, I'm happy to do that. Hopeful that people can kind of come away understanding where our sort of sticking points are on this, and the overarching concern to maintain this consumer protection.
So Jennifer, Krista Majunkin with SRP is asking, can you explain the third bullet in more detail? And then there's also a question from Mark Holmes.
Sure, I think I can explain this third bullet. So I think this just has to do with sort of a reporting or an accounting question as to whether or not the addition of new supplies within a provider's service area. We would just want to be sure that the way that that is reported or accounted for would not somehow be, the new supply would not be peanut buttered against sort of already existing issued certificates that are groundwater based, so as to reduce the replenishment obligation for those already enrolled groundwater based certificates. Realizing that sort of under this concept, the department would be assuming that that new supply, that new non-groundwater supply, is only going to be served to the new development, and therefore not being used to reduce a replenishment obligation for other groundwater-based certificates. And hopefully I articulated that correctly. If there's anybody else on the call who, from DWR, who thinks I missed something there, they can jump in.
This is Aisha at ADWR. I just want to say I agree with that explanation. Thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you, Aisha. And Jennifer, Mark Holmes asked, does this mean that ADWR will be a signatory on any type of exclusivity agreement for non-ACC regulated water providers?
This is Aisha. I'm going to jump in, and Jennifer, feel free to jump in as well. I think the answer to that is no. We did not anticipate the department being a signatory.
Okay. Then Brett Fleck with the City of Peoria has a question here. And Brett, if you want to add clarity to it, just let me know. For a designated entity wanting to use long-term storage credits without needing additional physical availability of groundwater, long-term storage credits must be recovered for delivery within the area of impact of recharge. If a development were able to have a non-designated water provider serve recovered long-term storage credits exclusively to that development to avoid needing to provide physical availability, would those long-term storage credits need to be within the area of impact of the water provider recovery wells? I would think yes.
Well, so I will, oh, go ahead. I'll defer to Aisha if she has anything to add. I would just say that this proposal specifically is not with respect to, this is with respect to certificates, and analysis, not with respect to designations, and is limited to this question of whether or not an applicant is required to show physical availability.
Yeah, hi, this is Brett. That's exactly my point. Yeah, is that so for designated providers, that is sort of the proof that needs to be made, and I'm wondering, would that same burden of proof apply to certificates if they're wishing to avoid proving physical availability? Because otherwise, that just doesn't seem fair if I'm understanding it correctly.
This is Aisha. Yeah, the physical availability requirements remain unchanged, whether you're talking about a certificate, a designation, or an analysis. As far as if stored water is going to be recovered outside the area of impact of storage, it needs to be proven physically available as if it's groundwater. If it's going to be recovered inside the area of impact of storage, it needs to meet the specific physical availability requirements for that supply, i.e. the CAP supply or the effluent supply, but it doesn't need to meet the groundwater physical availability requirement.
Understood. So physical availability of water in the aquifer would need to be there if recovering long-term storage credits outside the area of impact and provided to a development under this proposal. That's correct.
Sorry, can you repeat that? I just missed part of what you said.
Yeah, no problem. I was just clarifying my understanding. So if a non-designated provider is recovering long-term storage credits outside the area of impact and providing those exclusively to a certificated development, then that certificate would need to prove some sort of physical availability because those long-term storage credits were not recovered within the area of impact. Is that correct?
It would need to demonstrate physical availability as if it is groundwater. That's correct. But I just want to make clear that there are physical availability requirements for all water supplies. Groundwater is just typically more onerous, particularly in AMAs where there's unmet demands in the model, and groundwater physical availability is demonstrated via groundwater modeling. The other water supplies have different physical availability requirements that are not groundwater modeling related.
Understood.
If I could clear just one point on that point, I think it's probably hopefully understood in this in connection with this presentation, but where I'm talking about excusing or exempting an applicant from demonstrating physical availability of groundwater in a commingled system, that's obviously referring to groundwater, or I hope it's obvious, groundwater that's pumped from within the AMA. For instance, if a source of new supply is imported groundwater, the applicant would obviously need to still demonstrate the physical availability of that groundwater source, but this would allow an applicant to avoid having to demonstrate the physical availability of all groundwater in that system in a commingled system.
And this is Ken Slowinski with ADWR. We went back to the slide where Jennifer described the types of water that would be the new supply that we're talking about, and it does refer in the second bullet to long-term storage credits. That was intended to be long-term storage credits that would be recovered within the area of impact.
Thank you. That was the nuance that I was touching on. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Aisha, Ken, and Jennifer for helping to explain that, and thank you, Brett, for the question. Laura, you've got a comment, and then Doug Dunham.
Thanks, Warren, and thanks, Jennifer. And I think I understand this, and I'm wrapping my brain around that third bullet. I think I understand that as well, and the impacts to existing certificates that have a replenishment obligation under the GRD. It sounds like that if an agreement for a new development was successful in acquiring an exclusivity agreement, that new renewable supply would only go to that development and not be able to be used within the system for existing certificates, like you said, to reduce any obligation. I think my question, and I'm assuming, maybe just looking for clarification, that in these cases, I would not think that there would be a need for the development to enroll in the CAGRD if the certificate is issued on 100% renewable supply, be it long-term storage credits recovered within the area of impact or imported groundwater, that there would be no need for the for enrollment in the GRD. And I guess I was just looking to see if that was correct assumption.
This is Aisha, and thank you for that, Laura. The answer is no. we did not anticipate those certificates that were issued based on non-groundwater supplies to be enrolled in the GRD, with the caveat that, you know, we ensure that that third bullet concern is addressed or alleviated.
Right. It just means that that water provider cannot use any of that new renewable supply, like you said, to spread out in their existing system to serve to existing customers or subdivisions with certificates based on groundwater.
Correct.
Okay. Great. Thank you.
And then Doug?
So thanks, Warren. Yeah, I think from as part of the group that's been trying to move this concept forward, want to clarify that all of our alternate sources of water, or as DWR has in the slides here, new sources, would all have to meet the physical availability requirements for that particular legal type of water, whatever it is. So if we are recovering credits in the area of hydrologic impact, then that could be demonstrated as a new alternate source. If you're outside of that, you're really still just pumping native groundwater, and there you're going to have to rely on the groundwater physical availability. Likewise, if it's an imported supply from outside of the basin, outside of the AMA, whatever the physical requirements under the statutes or the assured supply rules would still apply. So this wouldn't skate those requirements. It simply would be that the assured supply review at the point of delivery to that subdivision wasn't withdrawing groundwater at that point. The other thing I'd like to point out is that we currently, in an accounting reporting process to the GRD, we have specific subdivisions or specific parcels within subdivisions. Remember, we do get down to parcel by parcel reporting for our member lands. And we do direct reclaim specific to some of those parks, green spaces, golf courses, etc., that rely on specific deliveries there. And we do segregate that in the reporting to the GRD, and wholly support the concept that other existing certificates that are member lands have their normal groundwater-based reporting and not peanut butter this across those. And then would also like to point out that we do, again, well, we can use the some of the specific developer agreements, as well as golf courses where the developer does help provide some of the funding for the infrastructure, provide some of the infrastructure, that we do have exclusivity agreements with those developers, those landowners, where we differentially send types of water to them. Again, effluent is a great example of that, to those uses. So that concept of some sort of exclusivity agreement is well used within the development community. That being said, heavy sigh, I think what we have here is a gross misunderstanding of how the Assured Water Supply Program really should function. And I've really challenged the department to open up its thinking here. I'm not talking about abandoning anything in the consumer protection field. This concept that suddenly groundwater should suddenly disappear and apparently the rest of the system goes dry, and we have to somehow, just guarantee that water deliveries are going to go to this one subdivision. That's not how the aquifer is going to function. That is not how a water provider is going to function. It's an insane concept, and I have a real hard time understanding where but let's contrast this with this certificate, proposed certificate, to how current designations are done. In current designations, we routinely stack supplies on top of each other, and the total designation volume is a combination of all the above. It's not simply, you got to double your groundwater demonstration to account for all of the renewable supply that may or may not be there. I mean, we don't have you back up the CAP supply with the exact same volume of your groundwater. You don't have the same thing with reclaim reuse. So it just blows my mind that the department is so wrapped around the axle on this, and where it just makes absolutely no logical sense to me whatsoever. And I think we need to have a really serious conversation with and try to work this out, because it just is completely baffling to me. It doesn't make any logical sense, and and any of my understanding of working over 20 years in the Assured Water Supply Program, just I'm stymied here to other than just throwing up my arms. So with that, I'll let somebody else make comments, and I'll move on and have a beer later tonight.
Thank you, Doug. I don't know if the department wants to respond at this time on any of that. If not, Krista McJunkin has a statement that I think maybe
I'm
kind
going to
of,
elaborate on if you'd like.
yeah, please do, because it sounds like you have maybe a little different view than what the one Doug just expressed.
Well, I think there's some overlap. I guess, I too am an alumni of the Assured Water Supply Program, so I have a soft spot for it. And I guess I'm bothered because the basis for this, even the need for this proposal, seems to assume that the Assured Water Supply Program itself fails in its mission to protect the supply for existing and future water users. And I find that disturbing. And I think we kind of need to get back to the premise of why that would be the case. And so I think I do share Doug's concern that DWR seems to be working from a premise that ultimately the program will fail, and they will need to protect against this highly unlikely outcome, especially if the program functions the way it's supposed to. I would also like to say that even in light of applying the policy the way that it is proposed, I noticed ahead, Michelle Van Quatham makes a note about these exclusivity agreements, that in the event that there were excess water available under one of those agreements, it absolutely should be spread among other users, because you'd want the best use of that water, allowable under the terms of the agreement. I think that that's important. We should be thinking about the best way to put these supplemental, augmented supplies to use to the benefit of the aquifer. So you don't want to use groundwater just because that's what you committed to in the initial application, if additional supplies are subsequently available. So I guess I'm just bothered by the premise of the proposal, which seems to assume that the Assured Water Supply Program is ultimately unsuccessful.
So could I just jump in there?
Yes, Jennifer.
I think, within the Pinal AMA, there are unmet demands. And so what the alternative would be, or what, if there was no requirement for a sort of an exclusivity agreement, you'd be allowing new development to come in to that AMA where the department's modeling is showing unmet demand and projected groundwater levels, which are below the required levels to demonstrate physical availability of groundwater. So that's the issue that we're faced with.
So thank you, Jennifer. And Kathy Ferris, you said you have a comment.
I do. Thank you. First of all, I'd like to say that at the last meeting, this committee had this particular issue generated the most confusion and the most comment, even to the point where people didn't even know what commingled supplies meant. And so I'm grateful to Jennifer and the department for putting a presentation forward that clarifies, at least for me, a lot of the issues involved. And when we talk about the assured water supply requirement, well, Doug, you got 20, I got 42. I'll put my years with this up against anybody's. And part of the reason we have it and why it works is because we have a Department of Water Resources that is committed to it. And if we did not have that, I can attest to you that we would have long ago eroded the assured water supply even more than it already has been. And in my view, it has been eroded. So for me, maintaining the sanctity of what assured water supply program we have is super, super important. And I could not agree to advance anything without the department's agreement on it. Having said that, I will say that I think this conversation is proof that this is not a concept that is fully baked. How would we even possibly have the kind of discussion that we've been having today in front of the whole council? I can't support moving this forward to the council at this point. And if we are going to continue to discuss it, then I think the issues about the Corporation Commission, about what it would have to do, how this would work, they all need to be explored in a lot greater detail than just, oh, well, we'll look at it. This is hard work. And, the department's going to have to take on some hard work if this is going to be advanced. So I say it doesn't go forward at the moment. Thank you. And thank you again, department, and Jennifer.
Thank you, Kathy. Michelle Van Quantham had the statement, the exclusivity agreement should allow a provider to use excess on an annual basis to serve others, even if it reduces overall groundwater use, because that would be a good use of a sustainable supply. Also, the ACC does not enforce agreements, so this issue needs to be discussed. The ACC can also change its position anytime, so I'm not sure it is even appropriate to involve the ACC. Also, I recommend changing the proposed exclusivity agreement concept with a water provider reporting plan. And Cynthia Campbell just noted that she agrees with Kathy Ferris's comments.
And I appreciate all the dialogue. I appreciate, number one, the department coming forward with this concept. I think it's the first time all of us have seen it. I want to go back to what we're actually proposing to move forward to the council. I'm not sure that was necessarily the intent of DWR, that this proposal per se moves forward. I think that's a different discussion. But what Warren and I were proposing is that DWR consider enabling such action. So that's what we're making a request to the council. And then I'd love to hear from DWR what they would propose as next steps, assuming that the council further wants to move this forward.
I guess I'll just speak for myself, but others can jump into on behalf of the department. But I think I would maybe let the committee decide whether it feels like discussion of DWR's concept, or now that there's a better understanding, hopefully, or more folks kind of can understand what this issue is about, if it would benefit from more discussion within this committee. I recognize that the proposal is just for DWR to review, and I think we are sort of already in the process of doing that. But if the committee feels like the council as a whole might benefit from a more concrete recommendation, or at least a more specific direction, I would leave that up to you all to determine.
And I see Rob and then Jake with comments.
Cheryl, you kind of stole my thunder.
Yeah.
I was going to, first of all, I can't pass up the chance to say how many years I've been doing assured water supply. No, I'm just kidding. I wanted to repeat, I guess, what Cheryl had said, is that there are significant issues with this proposal, but I'm elated that the department has brought something forward and has advanced the discussion, because I really think that while there's serious issues with this, I think what Doug had said and what Krista has said, I agree with. I just think it's just been important that we advance the discussion, because this is a really important issue, particularly down in the Pinal AMA. There are a lot of credits down there that are very accessible. And so that this might be a partial solution if we can, maybe get through more of these issues. That's really all I had to say.
Jake, you had a comment?
Yeah, and I think Rob did steal my thunder. Thanks, Warren. Thanks, Rob. I feel the same way. I think there's some things here that the concept is really good. The issue is growing. I think it's going to be kind of everywhere someday, and we really need to tackle it. The timing of this is great. So I really look forward to working on this further and developing it into something that is really substantial and fixes what's otherwise a growing problem. Thanks, Warren.
Thank you. Thanks to Rob and Jake. I guess a question I'll throw out there is, one of the things we knew this had been an issue that had been brought up as we have been looking at ideas for solutions. And so we put it on the list, and today we have even heard a proposed concept from ADWR on how the department is looking at starting to address the concern. So I think it is safe to say that we are advancing the discussion, and that is a good thing. And I guess I'm wondering so now I am wondering the difference of continuing to have this conversation here versus telling the council, hey, we're working on this issue and we're looking at it. And what all happens when then the council says, we'll explain this issue and what exactly are we talking about and all of that. I'm wondering, are we better served to continue to try to work on the issue here? And I'm just throwing that out because I've heard comments of concern about bringing it forward to the council, though I'm not exactly sure that we're bringing any specific proposal to the council.
Yeah, I mean, the intent was not to bring forward a proposal in the recommendations.
Yeah, I think the intent was similar to what we were trying to do with the recharge program.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Exactly.
And that we're asking ADWR to work on this, and rather than saying a specific thing needs to be done right now. Does that?
I think what would be helpful is to advance like we have it in the proposal. I guess my question to the committee is because I'm sure the council will have the same questions, if it would be fruitful to have a discussion at some point in time at the council to educate them on the need. Or is the proposal itself enough?
I think having the discussion at the council would be better if once we've had something specific that we've all agreed on needs to be done, letting them know that there is an issue and a concern similar to, say, the recharge and recovery program, and wanting the department to look at it further, that seems pretty straightforward, and would be better to just, just say, hey, this is an issue that was identified and we're asking the department to work on it.
Okay.
Is that work with, I know, well, I just see Kathy says she's agreeing with what I just said. So I know Kathy and Cynthia had expressed concerns about moving this proposal forward, and just to clarify, the proposal is to say, ADWR, we need to keep working on this issue.
And we are moving that forward. We're not moving the concept forward.
Right. Cynthia has a comment.
I think Cheryl just clarified it for me, because I was going to say what's in the document is not an issue statement. It's a proposal for a way to resolve the issue statement that we all don't agree upon. And so I'm fine if you want to just if you just want to kick it to them. Okay.
And I would hope that, DWR then would work on this issue, and if so chooses, can always come back and use this forum to, have continued discussion, or if it needs to be in another forum, one way or the other, the conversation needs to continue.
Warren, this is Carol at DWR. We put this concept forward as a way to get the discussion going on this. This is the best concept that we've been able to build at this time. And we were hoping to hear from the stakeholders what you all thought would work, and it would be helpful to us to know where you want us to take it from here.
Okay, and then Cynthia has a comment, and Kathy has a comment, and then Jake has a comment. So Cynthia, you first.
Nope, you were reading from my last time. I don't have a comment.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
That's okay.
Kathy.
Okay, well, I'm thoroughly confused. That happens these days, but when I said I agreed with you, Warren, I thought I was agreeing with you that you thought it would be better to continue to have the discussion in this forum, in this committee. And I strongly think that is the way to go, especially in light of what Carol just said. They need time to even vet this internally, and this isn't ready for prime time. We're going to take this to the full council and spend an enormous amount of time talking about something that isn't fully formed. And it would be so much better to just continue to work on it in a controlled environment and allow it to be a real proposal, as opposed to everybody speaking up and saying, well, I have real problems with this. Well, I don't know what it's even about. Well, to me, that is not a good use of the full council's time.
And just to be clear, Kathy, though, we're not bringing forward to the council the DWR concept. We're bringing forward what's in the paper, that DWR can continue this discussion.
Why, Kathy, you're muted.
I'm sorry, I was muted. I'm sorry. I don't like what's in the paper without having some explanation and some clarification by DWR. So I don't support taking the proposal in the paper forward at all.
So I guess this is what I had said earlier, and so I'll just say it again and just see if this would work. As we're noting, and again, the paper needs some additional editing based on all the conversations on all of the issues today. So we've got to work on updating that. But the point is, the general point that we wanted to say is that we would be sharing with the council is we have started looking at some issues, some ideas that we think would help address the issues that have been brought up. Two of them, one is we know that there are concerns and issues that have been expressed about recharge and recovery program. We are asking ADWR to continue to work on that and to do a comprehensive stakeholder proposal. Another area where we've had concerns expressed is regarding commingling on volumetric counting. We are asking ADWR has presented a proposal, and we are wanting to continue to have discussion about that at the committee. It's sort of our report of what we're trying to do in the committee. And that's it. I'm hoping that doesn't, yes, we'll have to find a really nice, concise way of explaining what this issue is, but I'm hoping that that doesn't then go into a long conversation with the council, because I agree, the bigger discussion would, until we have an actual proposal to take to the council, it's not worth an actual proposal that everybody agrees with. It's not worth having that big discussion there. Does that is that help? Or, and I know we're getting kind of really we may be getting really what's the word now? I can't even think of the word because now I'm a little confused on how I try and explain all this, but I think I still explained that pretty good. So and Cheryl's nodding, so that's a good sign. So Kathy, does that help? It's not that we're making a proposal to the council that this is what we agree on. The proposal is, here's an issue we want DWR to continue to work on, and the committee is working on it with them.
Well, that's a very different thing than saying that here are proposals that we're making to the full council, and this is something we're advancing. You're not advancing this, in other words. You're just letting them know.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, is it okay if I?
Yeah, go ahead, Jennifer.
I'm sorry, I should have typed in my comment. I think it might be helpful too if the committee has an idea of sort of where the discussion is going to occur next in terms of reporting that to the council, because I guess in reading the proposals, I wasn't exactly clear if the proposal was then to continue discussions in this committee. I think it would be helpful to the department to know where we should be looking to have these conversations, and really the hope is that folks can come to us with proposed solutions too. So.
Yeah, this is Cheryl. I'm looking at Doug's comment. Doug, because I agree with what you just said, if you want to speak.
No, I think just the paper says, hey, there's this issue we're working on, like some of the other issues we've pointed out, and that we're asking DWR to continue to work on that. And they have started that process with their proposal today. We're not talking about that proposal in any detail, with what we're going to be reporting back to the council. So I think this, as maybe look at it more of just a report to the council. This is an issue we've identified and continue to work on. And DWR has got some thinking that they put into this, and we're gonna, the committee is gonna take this up and dive into the fun details.
And I appreciate Sharon's comments about that we are looking for solutions, and that's what we've identified, and Kathy noting that there's, we classified these as proposals. So so yes, Cheryl and I may need to do a little more wordsmithing on exactly how this is presented. But I think as we're having this conversation, we are clarifying. This is very helpful so that we can clarify exactly how best to present this. We were charged to try to bring some solutions forward. We had really hoped to try to have some general agreement on some solutions or proposals by the end of this year, with the intent that we would continue to work on all the other ideas into 2022. Clearly, from this discussion, there are feelings about that some of these 5 points that we have brought up today, some are more proposals and others are not quite proposals. And I'm not quick on my feet right now to think of a good synonym or another word that would better describe it. So that's what we are trying to do. And we knew going for when we started this, that whatever package we put together was going to slowly get a little bit smaller as we've had these discussions. Carol, you're wanting to add some clarification, and hopefully you can.
I would like to.
What I was just trying to say.
Okay, thank you, Warren. I appreciate it. There is one thing I actually need clarification from you, the co-chairs with the committee. It appears that the committee seems to be at this point suggesting that we will move forward basically 4 things that we want to have continued discussions about, dig deeper into, and then there's a 5th, which is remove the waterbed restrictions. And in the paper, it could be either completely remove the waterbed statute or a possible repeal. Is this too something that is going to come back to the committee for further discussion?
The waterbed?
Yeah.
No.
No, Cheryl, let me try to clarify what Carol let me try to answer Carol's point. We brought 5 different proposals to you today for the committee to discuss. We moved it down to 5 based on the last conversation. There are 3 of the issues that are basically recommending I would call a recommendation. One, that DWR continues to look at the recharge and recovery program, that ADWR continue to work with the committee on the volumetric and commingling issue, and that we are recommending that augmentation is something that still needs to be done. We are encouraging that the long-term water augmentation committee continue to work on that, on augmentation, on the best approach for Arizona to move forward on augmentation. And saying Arizona does not mean it necessarily has to be statewide. We'll let them figure out how they want to proceed. We are then also recommending that waterbed be repealed, or that the restriction, however it was worded. And then also that we also seek to get whatever additional resources ADEQ needs to be able to put on a fast track the water reuse rules. And so that's how I'm looking at it at this point based on all of the conversation. Cheryl?
Yeah.
So.
Okay, I'm not clear reading the paper where you are on waterbed restrictions.
So waterbed restrictions, we're bringing it forward to the council to discuss. And if you remember, any legislative proposals would need to then go to a legislative stakeholder process outside of the council.
Okay, so some other process is going to, based on what the council proposes to do, some other group is going to look at this and
correct,
either pursue a full repeal or a partial repeal.
Correct.
Okay, and maybe I'm also going to step out of line, but this is, we've been talking about what we can do to better support our groundwater supplies. This is actually the one incentive among this package so far. It's one actually existing incentive to not utilize groundwater supplies.
I think we were lacking clarity of who would be running the package, i.e. the state. So that's why it would be best to just then, and maybe we'll get some clarity from the council and specifically the legislators on the council.
Thank you.
So Jake, I think I accidentally skipped over you and you wanted to speak, and then I'll note that Ron Doba supports moving things forward in the way that I just described.
Thanks, Warren. No problem. I just wanted to say this last concept. I think it can really be summed up, going to the bigger council in a really simple way. That they're commingling accounting practices that prevent assured water supply on renewable water supplies, right? It's kind of preventing it. And the solution is to allow for that to happen. Are there details behind it and actual text that still needs to get written? Yes. And I think that might be that legislative committee or further working with stakeholders. But I really think it's something that can be looked at and worked on further, and that the council can be apprised of it. So just wanted to share that. Thanks, Warren. Thanks, Cheryl. Sounds like it's been a tough meeting. I joined late, but I appreciate the work that I'm hearing about.
Thank you, Jake. And then Kathy Ferris added that the council is free to disagree with the committee, which we completely always understand and recognize.
And I think, getting back to, I think it was Jennifer's original question on next steps, I think we need to get through the council meeting. But as I'm hearing, we're going to have further discussions in this committee about the commingling DWR concept, at least is the intent, but I think we just need to get through the council meeting at the end of the month first.
And I think, as Cheryl noted, one of the challenges has been, as we've been working on, thinking of working on solutions, and the whole idea that we were going to develop some proposals that could be solutions. It's never been completely clear how that would move forward from the council. And so we do know that we make that we provide at each council meeting a report of what the committee has been working on. And so in some ways, this is this is very similar. It's ending up to be very similar to that of where we're reporting, and that these were 5 areas that we have been having discussions about, and this is where we are with them. And this was based off of the other discussions that we've had leading up to this. And we certainly recognize that there's a lot more work to be done. I'm hoping that as we move forward with doing more work, it also helps to clarify with us exactly how what we come up with might be, how it is advanced with the among and then with the council. We certainly have a number of issues that we have identified that we would want to try to address as we're looking at post 2025. And there's a lot of there is a lot of attention right now on water, and we're all certainly focused right now on the Colorado River, rightly so. But that is also another reason why we need to, as there's more and more pressure put on the Colorado River, that inadvertently and directly will start putting pressure on groundwater. And so the more that we can do, the more that this committee can come to agreement on different ideas that would help address groundwater management going forward is important. We, as we have talked many times before, we can't just rest on our laurels from 1980 and the Groundwater Management Act. There's a lot of pressure that we will see going forward. And this decade is certainly going to look a lot different than the past 4 decades. So I am confident that we can continue to work together and raise awareness about these issues and find ways to best address the issues and challenges that we've identified in this committee. And we certainly have a lot more discussion to do as we always knew there would be, and as this meeting has certainly shown us that there's much more to be done. So I just want to go real quick to the next slide. Next slide. That one. So again, this is the list that we've been keeping track of other proposals that have been identified by committee members since this summer. There's a lot there that we can try to grapple with and work on. And these were different ideas on how to address the 3 issues that Cheryl and I wanted to focus on this summer and fall. And going to the next one, the next steps is that we would present, I don't want to say proposals, so we're going to find a different word for that, but these 5 things to the Governor's Water Council, and we'll give a report on the conversation of where we're at this point and how we're wanting to try to move forward. And definitely emphasize to the council that there's been a number of ideas identified or raised that need further discussion, and that there's a lot of that we can continue to discuss going into 2022. So glad to answer any other questions, and also glad to turn this over to Cheryl, though I do want to say real quick that I really do appreciate all the comments. It really does help us be able to figure out what's the best, to know where all the different sentiments of the committee, and helps us to be able to better refine how we present to the council. And certainly want to give a big shout out to all of the alumni of the Assured Water Supply Program that have been on this call today, as well as everyone else. So thank you. Cheryl?
No, I mean, just thank you for everyone for this process. It will be a good discussion for those of you on the council on the 30th. And then we'll be coming back with next steps in terms of whether it's volumetric accounting or the other things that are listed as that we're going to work with DWR on.
Also, just based on a comment that I don't remember if it was Carol or Jennifer said, in regards with the proposal that they, or the concept that ADWR presented, I would really encourage that if you have specific thoughts on it, ideas and such, to please forward those to ADWR so that then we can, I think that will help as when we take that issue up again and certainly I would hope would be helpful to DWR so that can continue to work on that concept. So. With that, I think that's it for the meeting. So I again, thank you everyone, and we will certainly be talking on November 30th with the council, and then we'll be seeing where we can set up another meeting following that. So thank you.